Hi everyone, William here with the Grand Duke Dmitri series on YouTube. I was about to say diary series, but we've been doing quite a few letters lately, and we're going to finish up today with the letter of 7th February 1910. So we have done it in three parts. Today will be the third. It's a drizzly day in Davos, overcast, raining. So Dmitri tended not to go out on his balcony when the weather was bad. In earlier years, the idea in the sanatoriums had been that you were exposed to the weather no matter what it was. Some of them didn't even have windows. So whatever patient's room you were in, there were no windows, including sanatoriums in Minnesota. But Schatzalp was a private sanatorium, and by that time they didn't really. By the time Dmitri arrived in '39, they weren't really looking at cold as a curative kind of thing. They'd moved beyond that. So a lot of times, he might have gone out today because it's not very cold on a day like today, I should say. Anyway, I am just sort of yammering. So let's get started. Our recap for the second part of this letter. Well, it was one really long paragraph all about the situation with Alexei, who I believe was 5 years old at the time, and apparently he had been suffering quite a lot for 4 or 5 weeks, Dmitri said, with an arm and a leg that were very, very painful. I don't know what had happened with the arm and the leg, but there was this conflict that Dmitri describes between Dr. Ostrogorsky and Alexandra. Dmitri doesn't mention where Nicholas stood in all of this, but that Dr. Ostrogorsky had said that Alexei needs to be kept in bed and kept quiet and not moving around. And then he arrived at the palace and saw to his horror that Alexei was playing with his sisters, running and jumping and, doing typical 5-year-old things. And Dmitri tended to see Ostrogorsky's side of things rather than Alexandra's, and in fact he referred to Alexandra's idiocy, her idiotic behavior. How idiotic is what? Yeah, isn't that idiotic? He said. Anyway, that topic we have now moved beyond, and we're looking outward at Dmitri's life in Petersburg. He was clearly living in Tsarskoye and commuting to Petersburg. But anyway, he's talking about his life there. So here we go. I have an insane number of activities in school, blank, day and night. Oh well, on the subject of school, last week we had a concours épique and I won a prize, second, exclamation point. In the evening I go into society, I see Klein Michel often enough. They've been living in Petersburg about a month. I was at Ivanenko's twice for parties, and at old Maria Eduardovna's, at Klein Michel's once. I'm often with relatives. Aunt Michin is terribly sweet and kind to me. I had dinner at Aunt Minnie's once, I mean the elder. She has settled in Petersburg to the great delight of the residents of the city. She often visits various charitable institutions, which is very much a thorn in Aunt Alix's side. The Empress even went to the theater twice on behalf of those suffering in Paris. Overall, life flows along, and I have to confess that I'm beginning to get used to Petersburg. I see very little of the Hohenfelsen family, which of course doesn't exactly horrify me. If there's anything else you blank write, then I'll answer. And now a big hug from me for all of you. God keep you. And then this next sentence, I don't understand. This sort of sentence, I guess it doesn't have a verb. Papa, no. It's in its own separate line, not with the preceding paragraph. And then he signs Dmitri. So that's one of the mysteries, that last line in this letter. Okay, so he started this letter by agreeing with Maria that he was a pig. She had called him a pig because he hadn't written to her in over a month. And he agreed with her. And he said, I could tell you that it's because I have no time and I'm busy, but that would be a lie because it's more that I'm just lazy and I can't think of what to say. But now at the end, he is showing us that he is very busy. And he is also at the same time letting Maria know that when she writes him next time, he will reply. You write and I'll answer. Unfortunately, there's that blank word there, so I'm not sure what he says. If there's anything else you blank, one would tend to fill in the word want, but I don't know if that's what he said. Okay. So he's doing this intensive, really, preparation for steeplechases. And was it specifically because he wanted to participate in the 1912 Olympic Games in Stockholm on the Russian equestrian team? Was he vying for a place on the team? This is 2 years before that happened, but as far as I know, prospective Olympic athletes certainly are training 2 years before the Olympics at least. So quite probably, quite likely, he did have that in mind. I don't know. He'd done well. He was, proudly telling his sister that he'd participated in one last week and he'd won second prize. And that particular steeplechase was for the students at the cavalry school, where Dmitri was a student. And what I gather, I haven't researched the 1912 Stockholm Olympics. I couldn't tell you. I think Dmitri won 7th place in something, and 2nd place in something else. I don't know. I couldn't tell you. But at any rate, it seemed to me that the Russian equestrian team was all military. And I don't know if that was sort of a usual thing for the Olympics at that time, but that's the impression I get with the Russian equestrian team. So I'm sure some of the other students at the cavalry school were also vying for a place on that team. Okay, it's a bit confusing with the Kleinmichels because we have a reference to a male Kleinmichel, we have a reference to a female Kleinmichel, and we have a reference to a plural reference to Kleinmichels. So he starts out by saying that he has seen, I see Kleinmichel often, and you can tell by the Russian form that the gender is female. So by the ending of the name, the ending tacked onto the name Kleinmichel, you can see that he's referring to a woman. And whether or not this was the Tata Kleinmichel, who I've never been able to figure out who she was, despite the fact that my own late godmother was a Kleinmichel and had no idea who Tata was. Of course, my godmother was born in the 1920s, but anyway, Dmitri and Maria have known this Tata Kleinmichel from the time they were teenagers. Specifically when they were staying at Tsarskoye Selo, she wasn't a Moscow person. So, maybe Dmitri's writing about her to Maria because she was a friend of Maria's. That was what the impression I got from the 1906 diary entries, was that she was specifically a friend of Maria's, this young woman. And then he goes from Kleinmichel singular to they've been living in Petersburg, so the family has been living in Petersburg. And then when he says that he has been to Kleinmichel's once, he uses the masculine, masculine singular. So, yeah, anyway, all the same family, but maybe the young man was living apart. I don't know. And I do not know who Ivanenko was, nor do I know who Maria Eduardovna was. So Ivanenko is a surname, but Maria Eduardovna is the polite form of address for this lady, but we don't know her surname. So her father was named Edward. So that's why she is Maria Eduardovna, and we do not know her surname. And if any of you know who she or Ivanenko were, please let me know. Then Dmitri always had a good relationship with the Dowager Empress, Aunt Minnie the Elder, because the other Aunt Minnie was his biological aunt, his mother's sister, Grand Duchess Maria Georgievna. Too many Marias in the family at that time. Aunt Michin, that's right. We get to the Dowager Empress later. And Aunt Michin was another person, Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna the Elder, who Dmitri had a connection to. She was consistently kind to him when he moved to Petersburg. And, kind of, I don't know if maternal is the right word, but she seems to have kind of looked out for him and made sure he was all right. And she's terribly sweet and kind. Sometimes he complains about her. I think of the 1915 diary entries when she and Ducky are feuding and Dmitri just doesn't want to know. They're kind of, Ducky at least is kind of involving him in it, and he doesn't want to be part of that. And then later, after the revolution, despite the real tension there was between Dmitri and Kirill, while she was still alive, Aunt Michin was still well disposed toward him. They could set that aside, and they could be good company for each other. On a couple of occasions, he didn't see a lot of her. So now we move on to the Dowager Empress, and again, he had a very positive relationship with her. They seem to have really liked each other, and they kind of seem to have had a similar sense of humor. And also, again, after the revolution, he went in 1921 to visit not specifically her, but she was one of the reasons why he went to Denmark. And while he was there, she was in very, very poor health. I think she died in the next couple of years. And she had a heart attack or a stroke or something while he was there. And so he didn't get to see that much about her. That much of her. The time when there was tension was earlier in 1920 and 1921 when Dmitri was trying to get control of the Sokolov documents, the documents that Sokolov, I don't know where this rest is in his name, had managed to get out of Siberia, out of Yekaterinburg, about the murder of Nicholas and Alexandra and their children, and bring them, allegedly with one of the Tsaritsa's fingers, back to Paris. And Dmitri very much wanted to be the person who was sort of the person with the power of attorney or the executor or whatever you would say about that. And so he went to London to talk to Ksenia about it. And while he was in Denmark, he really wanted to talk to Aunt Minnie about it, but her health wasn't good enough. And, Ksenia made it clear to him, no, you're not going to bring this up with my mother. For one thing, she doesn't acknowledge that her son and daughter-in-law and grandchildren are dead. So you're just not going to bring this up. And he accepted that. Anyway, at this point in time, he's definitely siding with, in this rivalry between the two empresses, between the Dowager Empress and between the current Empress Alexandra, he's definitely siding with the Dowager Empress. So she's a thorn in the side of Alexandra because she's quite social, and not only is she's social, she goes to the theater, everybody loves her in Petersburg, the whole city is glad that she's moved there, and she's kind of one-upping Alexandra at every turn, and particularly by going to charitable institutions and charitable events, because charity, really was dear to Alexandra's heart, but she just didn't really have the personality, did she, to be out and about doing things like that. So yeah, and I had to look up, of course, who these suffering people in Paris were. So the Empress had went to the theater twice on behalf of those suffering in Paris, Dmitri said. So apparently there was this huge flood. The Seine flooded that year in February 1910, and the number I found was 30,000 people were displaced. So they were doing charity fundraising even in Russia on behalf of these poor people. So that was good, and that was good of the Dowager Empress. Yeah, and then he concludes with the Hohenfelsens. That's not really what they're called, right? They're the Pistolkers, the children of Olga Palais by her first husband. So they did not have the surname Hohenfelsen, but that's what Dmitri calls them. And she herself, I'm not sure when she became Princess Palais, but the first title she got, was it German, maybe? It didn't come from the Tsar, it came from another monarch, and it was Countess Hohenfelsen. And apparently that's still the title she had, but her children didn't have it. But anyway, there were quite a few of them, weren't there? There were 2 girls and 1 boy. Maybe not so many, maybe just 3, but they lived in Petersburg. And the son was a guards officer, and they ran into each other, and Dmitri ended up actually being rather fond of his 2 stepsisters. At this point, he's saying, well, it's not a tragedy that I don't see very much of them. So there's still friction. Then, he gives the big hugs as usual. God keep you, something he doesn't usually say, but it's rather sweet of him. And then there's this mystery line, Papa, ach, no. Go figure. Your guess is as good as mine. Then signing his name. Okay, so that's that. We're finished with that letter. What are we going to do next time? Well, some of you recently have looked at the first 2 in a 3-part series I wanted to do, just sort of 5-minute videos about Dmitri's life, sort of biographical, and I, with my collaborator Larry App, I did the first 2, and then I haven't gotten around to doing the 3rd one, and it's been like a couple years. And since I'm here at Tsarskoye, it's the perfect time to do the 3rd one, which focuses on Dmitri's the last years of his life here at Tsarskoye. So I think what I'm going to do in the next video is kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone, and talk about and do one of his letters or his diary entries from 1939, which will be helpful for me. There are more 1910 letters, so I hope you're not going to be disappointed with me. You can always let me know if you are, and I will always take it into account. And at any rate, I hope to see you next time. Bye.